In October 1973, two Soviet football teams, Ararat from Armenia and Dynamo Kiev from Ukraine, reached the finals of the USSR Cup. Ararat fans in Armenia watched the match live, but the Armenian TV signal didn't reach Nagorno Karabakh, a mountainous region in neighbouring Azerbaijan with an Armenian majority. For Armenian football fans living there, the only way to watch the match was to go up to the local TV tower and try to pick up the signal from Armenia. Emil Abrahamian and his friends did just that. Their team, Ararat, won, but there was no time to celebrate.
KGB-ն կանեց գլխների, բռնեց եւ տարավ հարցակնություններ, ձերբակալություններ եւ այսպես դու իրավունք չունես որևէ մի ձևով ուրախանալու, հրճվելու կամ դու պետք է ապրես այստեղ լինես ապրես իրենց ուզածով կամ դու չպետք է ապրես ուր ուզում ես գնա.
But Azerbaijanis had a different view of life in Nagorno Karabakh. Ray Kerimoglu lived in the nearby city of Agdam.
Üzüm bağları vardı, tənək bağları vardı. Belə bilən yolun bu üzündə ermənilər işləyir, bu üzündə bizim cəmaat işləyirdi. Bizimkilər alırdı 27 rubl Sovet dövründə o tənəkdə işlədiyinə görə ayda. Amma yolun bu üzündə ermənilər alırdı 80 manat, 90 manat, 100 manat. Biz onda uşaq idik də, məsələn fikirləşirdik ki, niyə belədir? Hətta bir çox Azərbaycanlılar cəhd edirdilər ki, gedib o ermənilərin sağxozunda zadında işləsinlər, ürəklərindən keçirdi ki, elə bir hallar da var idi.
Back in the 1970s, no one could have imagined that these everyday tensions would eventually lead Armenians and Azerbaijanis to a war. Claiming at least 25,000 lives. Forcing more than 1 million people from their homes and turning neighbours into enemies for generations to come.
Cip. Ասում էի գիտի պատմեմ, ասում ինչ օրեր ենք ունեցել, լավ օրեր ենք ունեցել.
Onlar bizdə yeyirdik, biz onlarda yeyirdik. Toylarına gedirdik. Məsələn, ölü yerləri olurdu, gedirdik. Onlar bizə, biz onlara. Da hamımız belə.
Տեհեպյաների կամ սունաթեր, կամ որևէ բաներ, յուրախության բարդադիր. Ամչեմ սրախ չկա բաժինքը, Yorğanı qarılan bir heyvarayashki tıxvaskı, nas tıxvaskı serpilitnir. Şeyin hamı bulabilir sarkelim. Tehedidi yuvum için tekrar maratın ama da lika birli sıramar. Ay cemot küçüğünün.
Uşaqlar əskər gedib veçir keçirmişək. Gəliblər gən onu kimi. Toy eləmişək. Hər şeydə. De hamısından da ailəvi bir qonşu olmuşaq. Yaxşı insanlar idi.
Şatçım hişim edaqçıqan demiştişim. Azada. Azadın. Martyanım minçer. Martı samolyot izverin gemahatsab. Ինքն էլ արդեն այս կռովը քնած, էլ չգիտեմ, ջահել էր, նա երևի սաղ էլ կլի, թե վնասված չլի, երևի իրար կյանքով ապրելիս ելի կենալիս կլի։
Qadının adı Zarik. Oğlunla mı, qızınla mı, gəlinlə mi, belə otururduq, söhbət edirdik.
Թխվածք եմ արել, վերջը հարգել ենք իրար, շատ։
Çay içirdik.
Մենք միշտ էլ մեր մեծերը չայ ունեցել, բայց դե եմ ասում, թուրքի չայը ուրիշ ալել։ Ընդ բազար որ քինում դի չայ եմ խմել, իմ ընկերուհիների հետ, հա, խմել ենք։
Çay bizim üçün məsələ qonaq mı olur? Hər bir şeyə çay vacındır.
Մենք մազամի ուստա բիրել ենք մեր գրիշենին քշինելա։ Ուրեմն այն վաղտը դեռ կռիվ չկար։ Մի տղեն հոր հետ գալիս էր, երևի վախում էր, իրանք արդեն փխտորվել էին, երևի իրանք արդեն գիտեին ինչ կար, մենք չգիտեինք, հա, պատկերացրու, նստում էր բիզեն էլ խմող, ուտող խմող մարդ էր, որ սեղանին գցում արդեն սկսում էին հաց ուտելը բան, պահակ էր կաղում, որ հանգարդ մարդը հերը շատ չի խմի, կամ հանգարդ վնասենք ոչ, մենք արդեն հետո զգում ենք։
Bu ara qarşanda olar getdi arvad. Kişi də arvaddan elə ağladı, dedi da biz bu torpağı bir də gələ bilməyəcəyik. Elə ağlaşdılar.
Ասում չեմ այդ ճանճապահները միշտ գալիս էին, վերջը հյուրասիրումի, տալիս էին ինչ որ պակաս պրատ էր, դե մի անգամից դարվեցինք, սա ամենավնասիկ եղմիջին ես եմ տուժել, իմ տուննա քանդվել։
Zadın pəncərələri qırmışdılar, aynə bəndin pəncərələrini. Gəldi gördü hamısı qırıqdı. Ondan sonra da deyiləm, biraz da bizə də pis oldular ki, bəs siz qonşuydunuz, niyə qoydunuz qırdılar? Nə qayra, adam nəysə qorxurdu da, adam qorxurdu.
Գիտեմ փոխանցիլ, այնա եթե նա գիտեմ որ խաղաղությունի պրոստիկլը եկասի ոնց ես, ինչ լավ, կյանքդ ոնց դասավորվեց, այդ ձևի կարայ, նախանձություն չի անել, որտե ինքը շատ լավն էր, ինքը ինչ մեղք ունի, որ սենք իմ տունը քանդելը կամ ենքան
Սա մեր հարևան ադրբեջանական գյուղն է։ Այս գյուղը ես մասնակցել եմ մտնելուն, ես գրավել կամ եսին ոնց կարելի անվանել մի քիչ սիրունել չի հնչում։ Ու նոյեմբերյանի շրջանից մենակ 7 տղարք են ելել մեզ հետ։ Մնացած լրիվ մեր գյուղի տղերքն են ելել, մեր ջոկատն են։ Հենց այդ բեմպեի ադինը մի քանի անգամ կրակեց, ոնց որ դրանից հետո իրանց մեծ խուճապ ընկավ։ ու կամանց հետ քաշվեցին ու փախան սենց քոլերը անտառներով բանով գիշերով սենց ճամփան ենք գնում են ներքի գյուղ են միանում էլի գիշերով դա մենք միշտ իմացել ենք նենց ասված խոսք ասում է թուրքը մնում է թուրք ոնց որ հետը ախպերություն արա, հարևանություն արա, բայց հետը ձեռիդ պատրաստ սպասի, էլի։ Տենց էլ դա ոնց որ եսիմ, թե բնական եսիմ էս մարդկերանց էս բնությունը տենց է ստեղծել, որ ինչ որտեղ կարելի ասել հավերժ թշնամի պետք է լինեն։ Դոստ ենք էլի, գնալ գալ կապ միշտ էլ է, բայց հենց չէլ էլ որ անդադ նորմալ է, էլի։ Ու դրա հետ համատեղ միշտ կռիվել է։ Մենակ ասում եմ գետու մենք ենք հիմնական լողանով, բայց իրանք էլ էին ուզում կան լողանան, մեկ էլ տնում ենք իրանք զենց բարձր ճամփենա, ճամփուց էս էլ լողանու տիանա, մեկ էլ տնում ենք քարերն սկսեցին գցելը։ Բայց միշտ կոնֆլիկտ էլ է։ Իսկականից միշտ էլ է։ Չէ, դե գնալը բացառում է, իրանք ոնց կուզեին գնան։ Մարդիկ տուն տեղ ստեղծել են, ապրելիս են էլ։ Հենց կռիվ էր, մենք կամ իրանք։ Չես կարա ասես որն էր ճիշտ, որը սխալ, դա արդեն եսիմ ապագան կարա որոշի։ Իմասիլնենը բրշիլ պետք է, անպայման։ Դաժե ասում են, ես իմ գրաված տերիտորիաներից պետք է տանք։ Ես էլ եմ այդ կարծիքին։ Խիչ պետք է տանք, որ հանուն խաղաղության։ Ապրեն էլի մարդիկ նահանգել են մարդիկ մենք էլ։ Առանց դրա հնարավոր չի։
Good evening to all of you. Thanks for having me on this virtual panel with Cinema for Peace Foundation. My name is Francois Jacob. I'm the producer and the director of a documentary film called Under the Same Sun. I believe you've just seen an excerpt from this film. And I have been documenting with this project the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict over Karabakh for the past 4 years. Why have I done this? Well, I have personally a passion for the Soviet Union and the former Soviet Union space. I've learned Russian in the process of making my previous film, which is called A Moon of Nickel and Ice, which was shot in Russian Arctic, Siberia, in Norilsk. And in the case of Armenia and Azerbaijan, I was absolutely always fascinated by the fact that for such a long period of time, for centuries, so many different ethnic groups coexisted mostly peacefully in that region under various foreign imperial rules, whether it's Ottoman, Persian, the Tsars, the Soviet Union. And this kind of multi-ethnic mosaic of people has completely imploded after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and ever since, you'll either have war or frozen conflicts, tensions at the border, snipers, civilians getting killed, and the constant threat of military aggression from Azerbaijan, who seeks revenge, and from a more of a protracted defensive, aggressive stance from Armenia, who during the whole negotiation processes in the past 30 years refused to remove its troops from the occupied districts around Karabakh, because the region is in such a complicated position of mutual distrust, of ethnic hatred, if you want. There has been such a difficult story of ethnic cleansing in the region. There has been such a difficult history of falsification also of the past, and all these communities have been commemorating their tragedies, their dead, their displacement, the refugees that they have. And so these different ethnic groups have become blind to each other, basically, and have almost ceased to recognize that the other nation basically exists, has its own culture, has its own pride, has its own right to exist on a certain territory. And the territorial dispute is so ferocious that discussing peace in the region is quite a challenge. So we will actually be traveling to the region with Cinema for Peace from this Saturday. Actually, as you people are speaking virtually, we will be traveling to Yerevan and then Stepanakert to document the human cost of the last war in the region, which has been horrendous. All the refugee flows from the Nagorno Karabakh to Yerevan and to Armenia, and from inside the 7 districts which were just handed over to Azerbaijan. So the humanitarian crisis in Nagorno Karabakh is absolutely terrible. We will be documenting this for Cinema for Peace, and I hope you'll find this moving and interesting, and that you'll understand more of the implications of war in this region and why it absolutely has to stop. One of the questions I was asked was, what should the international community do? And I believe that the international community should re-engage fully in the negotiations and not let them alone to Russia or Turkey, who have strong interests in the region. And the international community has to take serious steps and realistic steps in these negotiation processes, so that military solutions are no longer acceptable, and that realistic new borders and new agreements come from these negotiations and mediations. Both these sides usually exaggerate their positions, claim that the whole region is theirs, has been historically theirs. That has to stop. People have to agree on basically where their population lives, and agree on finding new common grounds for their own populations and for coexistence in the region. If the international community doesn't re-engage intensely in the region, then new cycles of violence will obviously arrive, and they've already started with the celebration of victory in Azerbaijan today, where Azerbaijan has basically claimed more territories inside Armenia now, in Sevan, Zangezur, and Yerevan, the capital itself. So at some point, the international community should really not only call for peace, but actively work on these complicated issues and get their hands dirty, basically, in these processes, so that the military solutions and the military aggressions just plain stop in the future. That's what I believe, and I hope you guys will be discussing this also live, and you'll be able to interact with each other on this very difficult theme. So I'm looking forward to sending your community lots of clips and documentation that we will be doing in Karabakh. I hope you'll find it interesting, and thank you very much for your time.
Hi everyone, my name is Victoria Alexanian. I'm from Armenia. I'm a filmmaker, writer, producer, director in fiction genre. And I consider myself an international filmmaker because I've been living in different countries and originally from Armenia.
Thank you for inviting. My name is Christina Soloyan. I am from Armenia. Currently, I am in Armenia. I work at the Imagine Center for Conflict Transformation. That's my main job. But I'm a former journalist, and that's where my interest in filmmaking and documentaries come from.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laurence Broers. I am the South Caucasus Program Director at Conciliation Resources. This is a peace-building organization based in London. We've been working in the context of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict since 2003. I actually also previously worked as the country researcher for Armenia and Azerbaijan for Amnesty International for a couple of years, so have some human rights background as well, but have been focused on peace building, dialogue in particular, but I've also written academically about this conflict.
My first question would go to Christina. Thank you very much for this beautiful movie.
Thank you very much. This was filmed in areas that I won't specify, but that are borderline areas in Armenia and Azerbaijan. So yeah, the initial idea was to find women that still carry the memories and the experience of coexistence together, because first of all, some people do not have that memories or do not have that memories and cannot imagine that at all. And some people, I would say, maybe including me at the beginning, imagine it and romanticize this coexistence a lot. So what was our idea was to find women that has experienced this kind of so-called communitarian peace or communitarian type of peace experience or everyday peace, which does not exclude conflicts from this reality. So they have experienced it and they could share, as you could hear from them, they could share the stories of sharing good and positive occasions together, but as well as dealing with everyday conflicts or tensions that would be dealt on that very local level. So this was the idea, and we could find those women in borderline communities that of Armenia and Azerbaijan. So this is outside Nagorno Karabakh territory. Yeah, those are women that had Azerbaijani and Armenian neighbors, and that could kind of share their everyday, their routine together, and this is what they tell about.
If I can, I actually, what I heard in the film reminded me a lot of a conversation I had on my last day, or the day before I left Azerbaijan last week. And we were at a settlement for internally displaced people in Tatar, which is very close to the recent border between Azerbaijan and Nagorno Karabakh. And the person there, he had lived also in Agdam, and he lived in a village where about half of the population was Azerbaijani and half were Armenian. And things that he told about their previous life, it really echoes now when I watch this film. He tells how well they lived together, how well they understood one another, that his father would speak Armenian and some of their neighbors would speak Azeri, and that basically they didn't really care who belonged to which ethnicity until this conflict erupted. But there was also one difference that, and when I heard this, it really, at first it looked to me like maybe things are not that bad after all. Maybe this can be reconciled if these people just live some time, meet one another, live for some time together again. But then there was one thing that was very different and very bitter in what he said. And he said that, you see, I can tell you a lot of good things about Armenians, but I'm sure that no Armenian will tell a good thing about an Azerbaijani, which is certainly not true. But this is what he believed and what people around him, the other Azerbaijani displaced persons, supported him in. And no matter how much we try to dissuade him and tell, look, there are obviously different people, and there are many who don't have bad feelings against Azeri, it led to nowhere. So it really showed how, on one hand, people can romanticize the past and can probably strive to overcome this difference, but how difficult it can be for them, especially for those who live through this conflict in their actual life, not those who are affected just by reading about it or watching it on TV. So it really looked and sounded very bitter and very sad for me.
If may I add something, also as a response to Oleg, actually, when we're filming this or actually developing the idea and also discussing with our colleague from Azerbaijan, we actually had that question in mind too, if this is, are we archiving the lost memories like this and that won't ever come up among newer generations, that would never reoccur. And yeah, to be fair, I think we were pessimistic, realizing that yes, maybe those are the last people that can share this kind of memories about each other, that do not dehumanize each other and can actually remember and be curious what was the destiny of that neighbor they had. And despite everything, if for example, even that old lady from Armenian side, her house is in a position that it gets shelled almost every time when there is an escalation on the Armenian-Azerbaijani border. So she has been experiencing the war throughout all these 30 years. It was not just an escalation of the 2016, the April war, or the current one. It was just an ongoing process. They were living with it. But despite all of that, she could actually see it and remember, and all of that positive memories, something that I don't really imagine us, my generation, to experience, I guess.
I'll add, I guess, a filmmaker's perspective to this. I really liked the fact that it was made about two women on both sides. It didn't just show one. I think this kind of projects were and are going to be very valuable in the future, because for many years that after the first initial war in 90s, we've been living in information blockade. So on both sides, we were not able to know and to understand each other's pain and loss. Something that echoes a bit with whatever Oleg was saying about Armenians probably not being able to understand or to say anything good about Azerbaijanis. So this information blockade and being separated by these borders did not allow us to know what each of us are feeling. And the memories, of course, they stay, and there shall be someone that goes and digs them out. And there are a lot of people that have and carry these memories. And if they have the courage to talk about the previous coexistence together, it helps to understand the context, I think. And also wanted to mention that the fact that it was about the women, it was also symbolic because women, they keep the peace and the rituals at home, and they have to go through everyday life. They are not the ones that go on war ever. So of course they have to coexist, live, and make home a friendly place everywhere they go. And we should be reminded of that too, and the potential of that.
The conflict unfolded in the context of the collapse of the Soviet Union. It has its roots in the early 20th century. And in terms of what's connecting it to the conflict today, I mean, I think there are a number of factors here. First of all, that identities that formed at the time of that previous conflict are now sort of playing out. We've had a process where in both Armenia and Azerbaijan, the Karabakh narrative is really at the heart of the nation building process. Azerbaijan internalized an identity as a victim, and Armenia more as a victor. And we see, in a sense, those relationships reversing, those roles reversing now. And that's causing, I think, a lot of trauma, especially on the Armenian side, of course. Another connecting factor is that there's been quite a degree of regime stability. So the regime essentially that was in power when the conflict ended in 1994 on the Azerbaijani side is still the same regime that's in power now. And in a slightly different way, that was also true in Armenia until 2018. So those who had a stake effectively in the outcomes in the mid-90s have retained power, and the conflict has sort of played into the political survival strategies. Whether that's using the context of insecurity and unresolved conflict to demobilize democratic challenges, or whether that on the Armenian side, embedding a national victory as your form of legitimacy, when on many other governance issues there was major failures under the previous Republican Party regime. And then the other thing that I think that connects the conflicts in the mid-90s and today is that they've come at times of very significant global shifts. So in the mid-90s, the end of the Cold War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the demise of socialism engendered a range of conflicts in Eurasia. This time, and that was a very sudden change. This time, I think it's been a more gradual change, the end of that post-Cold War unipolar moment and the emergence of a multipolar world that's actually been ongoing for many years now already. But this conflict that we've seen over the last 3 months, I think, is very much a symptom and evidence of this new multipolar world where regional powers assert foreign policies in their neighborhoods. And that's why we've seen this kind of bilateral interaction, sometimes competing, sometimes cooperating between Russia and Turkey, which has brought us effectively to the Trilateral Declaration and the new situation that we face now.
Niye bu kadar aktardınız? Niye?
Evsiz yəni yaşayış çətin olur, dolanışıq çətin olur. Hər bir şey evdən başlayır. Evsiz yaşamaq olmur axı.
ilin iyul ayında 20'sinde bir çıktı Ağdam'dan. 20'si günü biz Ağdam'dan çıktık. Daha önce yaşamak mümkün değildi. Bütün toplar atılırdı. Ondan sonra bizim yaşadığımız yerde bir tane ağaç kalmamıştı. Evimizin şifiri, şüşələri hamısı qırıq-qırıqdı. Ama biz buna baxmayaraq orada yaşayırdıq.
Biz çıxanda ümumiyyətlə bu uzun dərəyə falan gelib gəlirdik. Ata bir neçə dəfə qayıtmışdı evə. Niyə qayıdırdın Mexulda?
Qayıdırdıq evdə həm baxmaq üçün, nəsə dəyib, nətər olub. Ondan sonra qapıdan həm nəsə götürürdük, məhsul yığırdıq. Həyətdə əkdiyimiz məhsullardan yığırdıq, həm də qayıdıb evə baxırdıq ona görə.
Niyə bu qədər əziz edirdin? Canla da əziz edirdin.
O vaxtda yaşadığımız, qurduğumuz mülküdür. Ondan kim istəyərdi ki, aralanmaq, qaçmaq heç kəs istəməz ki.
Ömrümdə ən yadda qalan hissləri, xoş günlərimi mən o kənddə yaşamışam, o evdə yaşamışam. Belə yəni. Çünki doğma idi, çox doğma. Yəni indi məsələn bu 22-23 il keçməyinə baxmayaraq biz ayrılmışıq. Yəni sadəcə öz evimizdə olsa, deyək ki, hansısa bir rayonda, hansısa bir şəhərdə yenə də ora qonaq kimi sayıram özümü ki, yəni mənim əsas vətənim oradır.
Bizi evdən çıxartdılar oradan, o binadan, kooperativ binadan. Məcbur olduq, çıxdıq. Gəldik burada bir dənə Gədəbəyli Ağsaqqal adam vardı, bizə yer verdi. Evinin böyründən. Biz orada gəldik, yığışdıq, bir vagon vardı, boş vagon. Yığışdıq ona yayın o qızmarında, deməli, mühaşidə elə bilginən ki, 3 ay. 3 ay orada qaldıq. Biz orada bir ev dikdik, 5 metr, 6 metr enində, boyunda.
Bir otaqlı evdə.
Bir otaqlı ev ki, yığışaq ora. Barı tutardı ki, üstün örtələr. Bir 15 nəfər adam traktorla, uçaskovu, nə bilim, kənd sovetindən gəldilər, söktülər. Sonra təzən gəldi Baksol yolunda.
Yox, Pasyonka ya.
Pasyonka Baksol yolunda orada bir qaçqından bir evin yerini aldıq təzən. O pişi yer idi, olurdular idarə həyətində. Orada bir otaq tikdi, yığışdıq ora. Burada yığışdıq. 5 ildə burada olduq.
Necə bir zərəri keçirdik bu yollarda?
Yollardadır nə qədər xərc xəsarət, yəni pul gedirdi, əziyyət çəkilirdi, oradan ora veş daşıyırdın, bir yeri qur, yarat, bir müddətdən sonra, bir neçə ildən sonra bir də bunu tərk etmək istər-istəməz nə qədər buna vaxt gedir, buna əziyyət çəkilir.
Demək olar ki, uşaqlıq, cavanlıq məna kəsb eləmir də nədəsə. Qonşu, dost, tanış. Çünki hər dəfə tez-tez dəyişir. Yeni dostlar tapkinan, tadım isiniş. Bir müddətdən sonra buradan keç başqa yerə, bunlarla aralaş, yenisini tap. Yəni Sifətdən Ağdamaya çıxanda hardasa bir yerdə konkret məskunlaşsaydıq, bugünkü günə kimi həmən yerdən çıxmasaydıq harasa, həmən yerdən köçəsə, bəlkə də daha başqa cür olardı. Başqa cür fikirləşərdi, başqa cür uşaqlığım başqa cür keçərdi. Bugünkü gün mənim, yəni 32 yaşım olmağına baxmayaraq, mən hələ də həyatda hansı bir mövqe seçəcəyimi bilmirəm. Yəni özümü tam tapmamışam bu həyatda. Çünki o qədər dəyişikliklər olub ki, mən bilmirəm ki, hansı yöndə mənim üçün rahat olar, yaxşı olar, bilmirəm.
Gel atak bıçağı. Basın buyruğunuzu.
Pərvizə görə mən çox əziyyət çəkdim ki, oxumadım. Ona görə ki, 5 məktəb dəyişdi qaçqınçılıqda. Bərdədə, İsmailidə, Gəncədə, Bakıda, Fatmiyədə neçə yer dəyişdi. Bu uşağın savadı olmadı. Ona görə hardasa pis oluram ki, yəni ona mən savad kömək edə bilmədim mən uşağa.
Bax, indi onun oğlu böyüdü, Ayxan. Bax, bizim yaşadığımız nələr var ki, sən istəməzdin ki, Ayxan yaşasın.
O qorxunu, o toplar ki atılırdı, siz qorxurdunuz. Səni götürürdüm, Pərviz yadımdan çıxdı. Özüm də hardasa qorxu vardı içimdə. Düşürdüm padvalda, birinizi qoyub sonra qalib o birinizi gətirirdim. Yəni mən istəməzdim ki, dünyamızda müharibə olsun. Ən qorxduğum şeydir ki, yəni Ayxan o günləri yaşamasın.
Məhəllədə oynaya bilmirsən, məktəbə gedə bilmirsən, atışma olur, bomba atırlar, top, qıraq, snaryadlar düşür, partlayır, hər tərəf dağılır. Yəni bir uşaq kimi biz də istəyirdik oynayaq, rahat həyat yaşayaq, məktəb oxuyaq. İstəmirəm ki, o ağır günləri, o müharibəni, qaçqınçılığı, çöllərdə yaşamağı istəmirəm ki, o yaşasın. Təbii ki, mən istəmirəm. Yəni o müharibəni istəmirəm ki, o bilsin. Çünki çox çətin, çox, yəni dildə deməyə baxmayaq, onu yaşamayan bilməz. Çox çətin bir şeydir, əzablı bir şeydir, qorxulu bir şeydir. Yəni sənin gəncliyinə, sənin gələcəyinə, sənin bir insan olaraq formalaşmağına çox böyük zərbəsi var.
Neçə belə illərə çıxaq. Can sağlığıyla, xoşbəxtçiliklə.
I would say people are very happy so that these regions are back. Maybe if I will say this, it will not be wrong. They feel like, how to say, victorious. So they want, they are happy with the result actually. So what I can say anything about, I mean, my family is happy. They have seen our houses in Agdam. Despite there's only one wall have left, but they are happy with this. So it's very complicated how to explain.
The country completely is in mental breakdown, is in psychological collapse. It's still probably going to take a long time to process what happened and understand what could have been done to avoid the war, and what can be done in the future to prevent another one. But the mood is that sort of the war didn't stop. That's the mood, because nobody trusts, as a citizen, nobody trusts anyone at this point. Nobody trusts neither our government, nor Russia, nor the previous government, nor the situation over the borders and how the borders are being drawn. But saying that, I want to also mention that, of course, there are people, there are groups that more or less see different perspectives, and every group of people, they have their try to form their own understanding. So like some people are more seeing the fault of the government, the others fault of inaction of the entire international community. Other people are seeing the fault in our internal problems that have been growing over years, internal problems, I mean by our army not being in a good shape and people not knowing about it. So there was a lot of misinformation for people, and people are only now realizing and understanding it, and also understanding the unfair treatment that the people received in the very end because of the political situation and so many political players taking advantage of people being in a less advantageous situation. Of course, I want to also mention very important factor as COVID, because going on war during a pandemic might sound absolutely crazy to a Westerner sitting at home and fearing to go out from his house after 6 p.m. and, you know, soldiers going and fighting and infection spreading. And of course, the pandemic restarted in Armenia with a big, great force after and during the war. So people are down. Nobody wants to have New Year's and you know, Christmas celebrations. It's a completely down mood. Of course, again, I want to mention this again. There are some groups that believe this or that narrative more or, you know, less. But overall, people are expecting that this is not the end.
I believe the generation of these women that we filmed, because as I already mentioned in my at the beginning, because they have the experience of everyday life together, they they also gained the experience of dealing with certain also trust issues together. So, for example, there is a short story that the Armenian woman tells about the Azerbaijani men coming to work at their house to repair something, and his son coming with him because the conflict was already escalating. Those are the very first months of the conflict when this was happening, this person visiting. And she also expresses a bit of surprise and but also understanding why the son comes, because she tries to explain that they would not hurt this person, that her husband would actually sit and drink and enjoy time with this person, but there was already distrust coming into their relations. But I believe it has developed radically into very deeply entrenched distrust in our generations, more than these generations that actually had this experience of dealing with this kind of situations, because we were since almost 1904 and more in 2010s, the societies were so isolated from each other that the only time when you can meet each other, and even I, working in a regional organization, having Azerbaijani colleagues, we see each other pretty rarely, maybe twice a year. We do it abroad for a week, not longer. We do not host each other at home like these women would do. We do not share tea together and, you know, have this intimate times together of sharing our thoughts, fears, and talking through everything. This is what is lacking for our generations to actually start seeing beyond the nationalist discourses and narratives about ourselves and the other, and about our fears, and actually dealing with our traumas of the past and now also of the present, and also understanding the opposite side's traumas. And this is also one of the layers that we tried to portray in this film, to show how these women, what language do they use when they speak about each other, what are the stories and memories that they have about each other, because I'm pretty sure both women also saw negative expressions of these tensions, and so people and had kind of negative experience with each other too. especially during the wartime and in 90s when the war was starting and during the war. But they actually prefer and they are able to still preserve those memories, and that is one of the themes that we try to develop. And of course, the tea drinking ritual, and Victoria also mentioned it, and I'm grateful for that, that you noticed it. It is actually the scene in which they would share those memories together. Tea drinking for women, especially in this region, is the expression of trust, basically. And we try to recollect that too through editing and actually making them sit together and drink tea.
Well, I mean, I think in the short term, there are all of the very urgent humanitarian concerns and needs. People who've been directly affected by the recent war, who've lost their homes, for instance. There is all of the issues around unexploded ordnance, demining, the rehabilitation and reconstruction of settlements, both in Nagorno Karabakh that suffered in the last couple of months, but also the very substantial project of rehabilitating deoccupied areas and creating a basis for resilient communities to actually make these new communities, places where people will want to live. So I think in the midterm, there is a need to build out this rather hard framework that's been set in the Trilateral Declaration of the 10th of November. Russia and Turkey have got their roles kind of established, but there's a need for a lot of soft infrastructure around that to make it viable. And I think that's entry point for wider international actors. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is mentioned in the agreement, and I would hope that the United Nations would have a footprint in this process. And then sort of over the long term, but starting now, we need to support civil societies across the divide to engage in dialogue around identities, to break down these monolithic, quite militarized identities that have dominated in recent years. And this is why, this kind of discussion, the issues that the film raises is so important in terms of fragmenting these identities and unpacking, recovering the layeredness to Armenian Azerbaijani identities, so that we can imagine a different kind of coexistence in the future. And I really just want to pick up on a point that Christina made, which I think is very relevant, not to romanticize the Soviet past and coexistence in previous eras. There were always, conflicts and tensions, but and that Soviet past, in a sense, that ecology, that ecosystem for cohabitation, coexistence is gone. And we need to elaborate a new one, which is why, I think supporting local actors to engage in dialogue and to redefine their identities is something that we can do to support that. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Hello everybody, my name is Cem Özedmir and I'm a member of the German Bundestag. Before I share my views on what the German government and the international community should have done to promote sustainable peace in the region, let me briefly highlight where I'm coming from. In 2016, successfully I fought with friends together for the adoption of the German Bundestag resolution for the first time that condemned the Armenian genocide and recognized Germany's role in it. Many of you probably know Hrant Dink, a friend of mine who fought for truth and reconciliation in the Turkish-Armenian relations and was murdered in Istanbul in 2007, a topic very dear to my heart. My perspective is based on humanity and human rights. Hence, I strongly condemn the Azerbaijani military escalation in Karabakh at the end of September. To understand why there has been no peace in the region for a very long time, however, we need to look closely at what happened during the past decades. Neither side was willing to implement the so-called Madrid principles that were proposed by the OSCE. The international community did not push hard enough for a sustainable conflict resolution. Other conflicts obviously were prioritized. Increasing military build-up in Azerbaijan raised fears that one day an attack to win back Karabakh or the surrounding rayons would come. Eventually, with substantial support from Turkey and knowing well the weakness of the international community, Azerbaijan unfortunately launched its offensive. Voices for peace were actively oppressed on both sides of the conflict. The Russian-mediated ceasefire strengthens the Russian position in the Caucasus now. The West has shown again that when things get serious, it is unwilling to prevent Russian and Turkish hegemony in the region, which is extremely bad news for long-term peace, for democracy, and for human rights protection in the whole region. Germany and the European Union need to push for accountability for alleged war crimes. We have seen horrible videos and pictures online, and we need to push for impartial investigation and prosecution of those crimes. These civil society activists who are willing to take the risk to engage in honest debates about transitional justice deserve our highest support. Germany is one of the biggest international humanitarian donors in the region, currently at the moment, and it should be further expanded. Beyond the Karabakh war, we also need to investigate and fight Armenophobia in Germany and in the entire European Union. Recently, threatening letters received by several Armenian families in Germany in other events were in the highlight. First step here is to investigate these cases in the midterm, to better surveil and where possible prohibit associations related to the Turkish ultranationalist grey wolves in Germany, who are known for their Armenophobia. And I recently initiated another initiative in the Bundestag on this matter. It is our responsibility to ensure that absolutely everybody feels safe and that conflicts do not spill over to Germany. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that peace is more than the absence of war. This is why I would like to congratulate you for this important event, for bringing together a diverse group of people to discuss the possibilities for peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I wish you a fruitful discussion and much success.
I never knew fear could be a place from which we draw comfort and where we feel most at home.
This is our garden and she's my daughter.
I come from a village that lies at the foot of a gorge, terrible in hunting beauty.
The energy there is so loaded that I just started to sing.
I never knew such a sight could also be the face of pain.
I wonder if all war photographers are so interested in opera, especially in female parts.
Now he's here with you, right?
Ես այդ պատերազմն ապրում եմ արդեն 25 տարի։
You're a journalist, not a soldier. This is my home. Now I can be only a soldier.
What was your father doing?
He was a photographer, just like you, and a very talented one. We were both prisoners of our past, hunted by the same face.
And what made you become a war journalist?
I saw his talent, and we thought about sending him to cover his first armed conflict in a remote communist country.
Յուղից դուրս վերեցին, եկեղեցու խաչը ավետարանում ու մի արտասահմանցի լուսանկարչի։
Who are you? Who are you? Stop this. Because you're a liar. You're a thief.
I speak.
In the calmness of that beauty, we find our serenity. Worthy of the gate to heaven.
For me, it was just an amazing experience as a filmmaker, as an actor. And before I got interested in that region, I got interested in the screenplay. So the script was actually the very thing that hooked me. And then from the script, I needed another hook, and that was my meeting with the director and how we would interact. And I basically said yes to the script because it was a very short-term decision, and I had very little time to prepare. I needed to be convinced of the script, so which I was, and I actually was not so much immersed in the conflict of Karabakh just because I was so concentrated on that movie, and I was a little bit surprised that after the movie was finished, it was immediately starting. I mean, I heard people say you should call it the gate of heaven. There was immediately some excitation about this thing going on, which I did not really get because it was basically said by people who haven't seen the movie, which was very strange to me. And then the experience itself in that region was really overwhelming. It was at the one hand side completely peaceful, and at the other hand full of passion. These people I have met there, mostly Armenians, are so full of passion of this region, and they have generational histories to tell about their grandfathers and the fathers of their grandfathers. And then I was lucky enough to visit a lot of historical places, monasteries, and I got to know a little bit about the story, little by little, because we were in a zone that was particular, because once arrived in Armenia, in Yerevan, after a long drive, I went to another checkpoint. And then it hit me that I actually was not really in Armenia anymore. I was in a region that has a special status, that it was a republic, and that there is an ongoing conflict that was in a situation of ceasefire. And the situation of ceasefire was kind of the opposite of the passion and the peace I saw in the people. I mean, I saw a lot of military walking around there, but they were not on their edges. They were kind of, so the contrast for me, from my experience, I worked a lot in the Balkans, and I worked in countries who are, if not in war, at least in a warlike situation against each other after the Confederation, the Yugoslavian Confederation exploded. And for me, it was close to that. it mostly explodes about ethnical and cultural origins, and this kind of fuels a war that is ongoing over decades, and there seems no easy solution inside. Yet for a strange reason, I felt very safe there. So the real shock for me was the last month, that the very places I have visited a year before or 2 years before were now just bombarded in a very strange escalation, where this place seemed more the playground of bigger forces who did their geopolitics, or who concentrated their geopolitical decisions on this very region. It's for me a very difficult thing to understand. I'm not a specialist of this region. I happen to have a lot of Armenian friends here in France, but they're not my friends because they're Armenian. They are my friends because they became my friends. And then I found out that they're also Armenian. For example, there is a very famous actor, Simon Abkarian, who is in France, quite a figure, and I've done quite some movies with him, and I love a lot his work, and he happens to be Armenian. And he had a very strong point about his point of view of what happened there. And I could actually really divide this point of view.
Say a few words here. I think, you know, the crew of the Heaven and the cast are very multicultural, multinational. I just want to repeat the same thing that Richard said. You know, we didn't do this movie because it was about Nagorno Karabakh. So yeah, so I would like to you know, kind of repeat what Richard just said. You know, we didn't do this movie because this movie is about Nagorno Karabakh. We did this movie because it is a very interesting script and a very interesting approach to this thing, you know, where could the story have happened in someplace else? Absolutely. I think it's a universal story, and it could have played in Somalia, it could have played in the Balkans, anywhere, really. So for us, you know, it was not so much about highlighting the conflict itself. Of course, the conflict is there because it's the background of the story. Raising awareness, yes. I think art is a very important media to raise awareness of things in a different way than we get it on the news.
Mm-hmm.
The news is a very temporary media and very on the surface, you know. It's prone to be escalated when it's hot.
Mm-hmm.
It's prone to be forgotten after you know, 2 weeks because there's another thing happening. So art to me is this media that raises important questions that are not necessarily raised in the media, news coverage, and that probably stays with you long after you watch the film.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, you know, the film we've done is really about ordinary people that end up in those extraordinary circumstances, really about the wounds that are left after the dust settles, right? After the ceasefire is reached. It doesn't matter who wins, right? In our case, it was one side, you know, two months ago, it became another side.
Yeah.
But the wounds will be there. And what just happened recently in Artsakh is heartbreaking, of course. And, you know, it's heartbreaking because we like to know the people who live there. We have many friends there and so on. But at the same time, it's heartbreaking in general as for, you know, a regular person.
Mm-hmm.
This region will, you know, it will be bleeding for a long time now.
I think
it took 30 years to you know, build this beautiful city of Stepanakert, which is in ruins now.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, doesn't matter who's in charge. It will be another 30 years before it's
The first thing I'd say would be that when the war ends and a ceasefire is signed, that's not the end of the danger for civilians. What we're trying to do is clean up after the conflict and make it safe for all those that have been displaced during the war to return to their homes and to get on with their lives. You talk about rebuilding Stepanakert. Obviously, no rebuilding can start until the city is clear of unexploded ordnance. So that's when we come in. And our teams have been on the ground all the way through the war. We conduct education on the risks associated with explosive items. We've handed out leaflets. We've had radio campaigns, television campaigns to educate people, particularly children, on the dangers of mishandling or tampering with items that they're not sure what they are. We're now able to expand our work. So at the moment, we're in the most populous areas of Karabakh. So Stepanakert, Martakert, Martuni. We are, first of all, assessing the damage to buildings, to the towns, and prioritizing areas where we are clearing. The main items we're finding are cluster munitions and rockets. So 2 different types of rockets, 3 different types of cluster munitions. It's really the cluster munitions that are the most dangerous. You will have seen pictures of them. There's the M95, the most common one with a pink ribbon. These particularly are attractive to children due to their innate curiosity and the colorful nature of the item. There's a type called a Shoab and also a 9N235, both Russian made. We found hundreds of these in the last few weeks and destroyed them and enabled people to move safely throughout the city. There's an awful lot of work to do. We're 3 weeks after the war. This clear up operation, as far as Halo is concerned, is going to last at minimum another 12 months. But this is a very critical time now, in the time when the conflict has just finished. This is when we see buses full of people arriving back in Stepanakert. This is when we need to warn people, as I mentioned, the risk education, and we are also clearing a lot of items from rubble, from people's gardens, from roofs, from balconies. The cluster munitions have a high failure rate, so they don't function as intended. So around 10 to 15% of the hundreds, if not thousands, that have been dropped are still going to be littered around. And we are trying to warn people and to remove these items in order to keep them safe as they try to return to their homes and to rebuild their lives. And all of that needs to happen before the rebuilding job can really start.
I can start. I think maybe I would give a perspective of an Armenian and also part of the film. I think one of the key points is what Miles just mentioned, is that people are actually moving back. They want to go back to Karabakh and basically restore their lives, their livelihood. So that gives us hope that people still want to go back to Karabakh. At the same time, in order to discuss peace process, peacekeeping, and peace building, I think there's a lot of fundamental issues that we have to really explore to be able to understand how we can even get to peace. So one of the things that is very important to understand is reconciliation between Armenians, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. And I think that kind of speaks volume to the fact of the Armenian genocide. If you were to go back and understand that the Armenian genocide has been recognized by over 30 countries, Bundestag as well. However, the recognition doesn't stop there. You may recognize that it's a beautiful symbol and we're extremely thankful. However, there's fundamental steps that need to be taken to get to that peace process. And one of the things is, and I love, and I'll read something to you because I think it's really important to understand how to even reach peace. So acknowledgement leads to recognition. And this is a professor who actually teaches about peace and about understanding the genocide, and not just Armenian genocide, just genocide as a whole. And recognition leads to accountability. Accountability leads to reparations. Reparations lead to justice. Justice leads to reconciliation, and reconciliation leads to peace. So as far as the Armenian genocide is concerned, we've only stopped at the recognition part. We've been dealing with 105 years of denial. So it makes it really difficult to talk about peace for us as Armenians when we feel there's still room to improve these steps to get to peace, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also wanted to add something about the role of the artist. I happen to have made quite some movies that are concentrating on conflict. As a German, of course, in making your career outside of Germany, you're offered a lot of Nazi characters. So movies and social have the possibility to engage socially. And the movies are done basically to take care of themes that human mankind has not yet digested. That's why you see a lot of movies about Nazis, because that's one of the main events of the 20th century. And that's why it's necessary to do them. I mean, the Bloody Monday or the Watergate conflict, or as for now, it's forbidden to shoot movies in North Korea. You should do them. The first thing of the artist is to put the focus, the camera there where something is happening that should be changed or digested or improved. That's, I think, one of the main steps of a cinematographer, to go where something needs to be told to people who do not know about that situation. So in that sense, Gate to Heaven has done exactly that. And you see how difficult it is even to do. It's not a warmongering movie, and it's not even about the conflict between the Azerbaijans and the Armenians. It's the story of a war reporter who has private issues, and he happens to have covered that particular conflict. And there is a love story, but even showing that movie in some festivals seems to be an issue. So that's where you, as an artist, you put your fight there in order to talk about themes that otherwise would go into oblivion.
Well, to start with, protection of civilians is a cornerstone of international law. The warring parties are supposed to take all precautions to minimize the deaths of civilians and to minimize the damage caused to the civilian infrastructure. This also includes the prohibition of indiscriminate attacks that cannot be accurately pinpointed on the military targets, and using weapons that cannot be accurately used to avoid civilian deaths. Unfortunately, what we've seen in this conflict, similar to in this recent conflict, similar to the one that took place 30 years ago, is a complete disregard of international law and international humanitarian law by both sides. We saw both sides using heavy explosive weapons with wide area effects in densely populated areas. We saw civilian deaths and injuries as a result of prohibited use of prohibited ammunition, such as cluster ammunition. Some examples to give are the bombing of the Stepanakert by Azerbaijan, and the bombing of the city of Barda by Armenia. Both parties, unfortunately, are reluctant to join the international treaty on cluster munitions, and despite the pressure by international community and the civil society, this remains the reality even after the conflict. So I think events like these are extremely important to raise the awareness of what damage this willful disregard of international humanitarian law can bring to the lives of civilians, which is not only during the conflict, but it ranges long time after. The cluster munitions, for example, the reason why these are prohibited, they remain active just like landmines. 5 to 20% of them remains unexploded, and they pose threat long time after to the civilians, even after the hostilities has ended.
I would like to add to that if possible.
Sure.
Yes. So what I would like to add, which I think is very important to again understand a lot of the fundamental issues before we can again go back to understanding international law and so forth. One of the most important things that happened in the last 2 days is the Human Rights Observation Day that was on December 10th, 2 days ago. The same day, the Turkish president visited Azerbaijan and held a victory parade to celebrate the winning of the Karabakh War. And at the same time, the president shared with their citizens that the capital city of Armenia, Yerevan, Sevan, Sunik, is all part of Azerbaijan land. And at the same time, the president of Turkey referred to Enver Pasha, who was one of the architects of the Armenian genocide. So when you have leaders, world leaders such as them, who discuss these types of topics in front of their entire citizen and makes it on world news, that makes it even more uncomfortable for Armenians. And this is where the core problem lays, is how far do we want to take the Armenian genocide? Do we want a second one? And that's the fundamental issue in all of this. However, to echo what Richard said, what we've done is, as much as the challenges that Armenians are faced and have been faced for 105 years, we've used, Jivan as a filmmaker, as myself and the team, we've used film as an outlet because it's beyond our imagination of what's really happening with Turkey and Azerbaijan. I don't think it's a secret that Turkey actually funded this war with Azerbaijan, supplied with Syrian mercenaries, paid them $2,000, gave them another $100 for beheading Armenian soldiers or civilians. This is just an unacceptable act. However, we've chosen the path of making films and preaching peace because we definitely think that films are a good outlet to do that. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there, that, you know, Gate to Heaven deserves the recognition because it has stood up against hatred, it has stood up against terror, and it has stood up against aggression. And that's what we stand for.
Just to add, I think the key issue here in securing the reconciliation and peace in the region is accountability, and the accountability runs on both sides for the violations of loss of war.
Of course, and the liability and accountability also starts with the perpetrator. And we saw the first bombing on September 27th in Stepanakert. And that was very well documented and confirmed by France and many others that it was perpetrated by Azerbaijan with the help of Turkey. So it makes it, again, very difficult to go through the process and to come to peace when we have all these obstacles in our way.
I think it is important to understand there are two sides kind of the problem to deal with. The one side is we who are well financed, maybe in France, maybe in Germany, but at least with European money. We all come from a background, or at least have partly experienced a background in Western societies and come from a different perspective. And if we make films like the one that we just saw, this is just a wonderful example to raise awareness, especially in countries that have no idea about this conflict. That's why it's so important to make these films, and especially in such a great quality like the one we just saw. We are working exactly on the opposite side. We are looking at what are these people watching, what are the people seeing every day on television in Armenia, what are they seeing every day on television in Azerbaijan? And they won't see this film. I mean, this film won't be shown in Azerbaijan. But the question is really, we should work on a very, very low level, let's say, or that's what we are trying to do with the support of the EBU and the filmmakers and producers and broadcasters from all over Europe, to go into these conflicts, to go to the countries and to see that the media is getting more and more aware and gets possibilities to be shown, because that is really a long-term way to work. And also, I mean, we have several Armenian people joining us here in this panel. There's nobody, if I see this correctly, who really has a strong Azerbaijani background. And this is really something that we take a lot care of, that we always try to get on both sides a little bit more understanding for the other side. This is why I like this small little film, Bounded for Memories, so very well. And I mean, I'm here right now in Tbilisi from Georgia. And of course, here we do have Armenians and Azerbaijanis that here they can meet. You know how difficult it is for Azerbaijani citizens only to say that they have contact, they have friends with Armenians. It's really very difficult for Azerbaijanis to say this openly. And we did a workshop together with Patricia Rommel, a German-French editor who came to Tbilisi. And we did edit with film teams from Armenia and in Azerbaijan. And what I liked best was, in the end, there was an Armenian editor who was editing a film for the Azerbaijani state television. And I mean, these are exactly the little things I think we have to try to get the media, that is the main propaganda outlet. I think Adrien just mentioned the parade or the appearance. What can you do with winning the war? What kind of PR do you do? If you don't have the media that is getting this point across, then you don't need to make this PR. I mean, the media, you make it for the media gets it to the people, and people are getting just influenced and getting more and more stuffed with hate against the other. And this is what we have to work against. And I think this is really the responsibility, whether you make a short news piece and you only have the possibilities in your life, like many young Azerbaijanis and Armenians have. They now have to make short, small film pieces. And people like us as producers, being it in Vilnius, Munich, Berlin, Paris, wherever we live or have our companies, we of course have another responsibility. And I think it's really the two coins have to be done. It has to be raised awareness outside to help really people like Halo, to help people that are doing things like Natalia is doing. But on the other hand, I think it's also important to see how we can support and help the media on the ground.
One thing I think is, Stefan, right, for all that, I do truly appreciate it. One thing that I've always wondered, and maybe you can help in this area, is how do you rebuild trust in the region and between the countries? Because the trust has been broken, you know, over 100 years ago. So I think media can really help to bring back the trust between people. But one of the major obstacles for that is, you know, we've always known that Azerbaijan actually promotes xenophobia in the country. They teach children from a young age in kindergarten to hate Armenians. And hate is very poisonous. It's this mental venom that takes over your soul. And as they get older, that hate becomes even more profound. So I think that's the biggest struggle of bringing Armenians and Azerbaijanis together, because A, the trust is broken. That's the fundamental issue. Once you restore trust, then you can start the dialogues between people. So I like to see more of what can we do to bring trust and awareness to everyone. I think that's an important factor.
I may say a few words. All across Europe, it was like it wasn't happening. So, you know, again, probably we as, you know, citizens of European countries have to talk to our governments and push them, but we have to react because to me, I mean, I'm not part of the conflict, right? But it's very clear that there are two very, very much opposed nations. And it's, I would be probably naive if I thought that they can find this solution by themselves. It's been like this for over 100 years, right? So to me, it's obvious that they need a moderator. And, you know, I only wish that you know, the strong powers of the world would be more proactive. And, you know, this outbreak of war happening right in the middle of presidential American elections is, you know, probably the plan that way, you know.
Absolutely. And COVID.
So it is very, very unfortunate that, in fact, you know, this particular conflict is viewed as like, you know, minor thing on the world scale.
Thank you, Adrienne. I'll definitely give you the next word. I just wanted to mention regarding of what was said, the importance of democratic process, because as a filmmaker, who I am myself, I think we are put in front of very difficult choice always, like what we follow. Do we follow the politics and politicians and their narrative, or do we follow the human narrative? And, you know, here it's very clear to me at least that the political narrative is very complicated. The human narrative is simple. You know, people are people, and there are people across every border, and we can see it through the films, and it's very easy to go and to, well, it's not easy to film and to get those stories out, but what I'm saying is they're there because those stories, the human stories, are real and they are sincere. But what's really hard is for a filmmaker to try to change the political process through movies like that, who are completely 100% only based on the human factor and defending the human factor and peace. If we are talking about a country with a strong democratic process, I see myself it helping the process and helping a filmmaker too, because when a filmmaker is doing a film about peace, about reconciliation, about trust, about problems, about the human factor of all of that and humans behind it, like the ones we saw in the narratives before, they appeal to the large mass. They appeal to people, and people are the ones to change their perspectives. People start thinking like, oh wow, so you know, Azerbaijani woman feels the same pain like, you know, Armenian woman, etc. Or Azerbaijani soldiers or just men, simple men, start understanding what the people feel across the border. So they can go at some point and talk to their governments, talk to some big organizations that can talk to governments. But if there is no democratic process, they're stripped of that opportunity. So the process stops right there. So people can become much more educated and have a lot of perspectives about all that. But in the end, if the political narrative doesn't change, there is very little, you know, hope or, you know, very little change that can happen for a country in general. I will bring example with, I guess, with the cluster munitions, as much as I can understand that, you know, both of the countries are using it. It's a fact. From political standpoint, it can be understood, well, if a country is being attacked with cluster munitions, you as a country have to respond because you have to defend yourself. So if you're talking about responding with the arms and the weapons that you have available, you can end up using cluster munitions as a result. But if you're talking about humanitarian perspectives, it's bad on both sides. So it's very important for me to understand the narrative that we are trying to form is complicated on so many levels. Filmmakers' strength and opportunity is to dive into this humanitarian factor, show the problems within, but then we have to know that the political process is being fair and balanced at the same time, so that we can do our jobs right, and the balance in the end happens the right way.
What gives me hope is that the function of art is actually to take care of a thing, of a theme, of issues, as long as they are issues, as long as there's something not right, not in place. There are people who are bringing in their energy to make it become right. I mean, I'm an actor, and then we have a director, and then we have producers, we have Amnesty International, and we have, we have representatives from different boards specializing professionally in different qualities, and we are kind of all here to push peace a little bit more forward. And as long as there is no peace, there will be people like us making movies, defending international humanitarian rights, going in to help people who are in distress, rebuilding destroyed infrastructure, taking care of education. So all this is happening because we are humans. So we are at the same time our biggest enemies, and at the same time we are our biggest helpers. One thing seems to me of the essence, and it has been said by a couple of people here, by you, Victoria, and by Stefan as well. I think it's of the essence that at this point to bring both sides on the table. I, for my part, regret a lot that there is no representative, no Azerbaijan representative, either a producer or in whatever function. It seems to me paramount that we're going, because there is a tendency we humans have, that our own failures we can explain by given circumstances, so to excuse themselves, to excuse ourselves, and the behavior of the other, we are very easy to condemn it. And from the point of view of an impartial referee or an impartial observator, all say the same. When you take this position, you see the necessity that those two parts need first work on pardon, second on understanding, third on letting go, and that's the base of trying to build something new that can actually, let's only take the historical point of view between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I mean, of course, yeah, Azerbaijan has a shorter story than Coca-Cola. Still, the fact is that doesn't make it less a country. Yeah. So you can't define the value of a country just by the longevity of its lifespan. The other fact is that you as well as Armenians say, this is Armenian ground. You can say from the Azerbaijan point of view, this is Azeri ground, because at a certain point it has been given to them by Russian Confederation. I mean, the story of the 20th century speaks for itself. Still, the fact is that if you go hundreds and thousands of years behind, it's more Armenian than Azerbaijan. But it doesn't push us to its. You can't count it in numbers of years. Mm-hmm. Still, the fact is that there is a conflict, and concerning, and this conflict is even inside the Armenian population itself. The ceasefire that has been signed by the president of Armenia has led to an immense uproar in the population, and everybody, the whole Armenian population wanted to destitute him. So it's tricky for us outsiders to watch it, but it's tricky for us to understand. But I think that's the very reason why we shouldn't quit. There is a conflict. If we let it just go, well, it's not my conflict. It's not my war. It's not my battle. And then when your battle is on, your own battle will be on, and you haven't helped the others, there will be no others who will help you. So there is an international solidarity that's kind of ongoing in the history of the last 200 centuries. That's for me kind of the battleground for our engagement.
Country, and also giving the right to self-determination to the people of Artsakh. I think that's very important, and that gives us hope. The other thing that gives us hope is that the more and more the international, especially the European countries, realize what has really taken place is to take actions, because the perpetrators of the Armenian genocide have never ever there were never a significant consequences of that. So they were never held accountable for the crimes they committed. So they essentially, in their minds, they got away with it. It's like the bullying effect. If you don't put a stop to it, the bully will continue to bully. So I find hope that, you know, Turkey and Azerbaijan will be sanctioned, both on political front and whether it's financially, economically, military. I think if I'm not mistaken, Netherlands has already taken steps to do that. EU, unfortunately, just postponed it for another 3 months. So that gives us that hope. On the hope of filmmakers, I'm very hopeful that our films will continue to make a difference. I'm hopeful that our films will continue to bring awareness. I'm hopeful that it will allow us to have a different perspective on life and help us deal with uncertainties. That is my hope.
Thank you.
I'll say that my hope certainly is tied to what I was saying before, and that is the hope for a democratic process. I have a big hope that both Armenia and Azerbaijan and Turkey will go through democratic process, and this will help all of the countries to bring people's voice and the equality of people's voice to important spotlight. I think that currently with regimes happening in some of the above mentioned countries, it's going to be hard because the political narrative is shaped through current political regimes. We had an opportunity to start a new process, and I hope, and I certainly have a continuous hope that this process will not be altered and will reshape itself into something real, because right now the country is in a very unstable situation politically. So that being said, my answer is democratic process.
One thing that I will say is when I arrived back in Stepanakert a few days after the ceasefire, one thing that struck me was after the darkness in the city, I was used to such a vibrant, happy, safe place, Stepanakert. There was no gas, there was no electricity. The city just felt so dark and desperate. And over the last month, as the gas and electricity has come back intermittently and then more permanently, and more people have moved back, opposite the Halo HQ in Stepanakert, there's a large block of flats underneath which the shelter was that during the war we used to hide, underneath this block of flats. So I know it well. But each day that I spent in Stepanakert, at night there's more lights on in this block of flats. It shows that more people are returning, more people are coming back to the city, and that to me says that life is starting again. And as we travel around the new Karabakh, clearing cluster munitions, clearing rockets, clearing all the other unexploded ordnance, just seeing more and more people and being able to make them safe again gives me real hope for the future, and that even more lights will come back on in the city and across Karabakh.
If I may say a few words, I would say that regardless of the political, geopolitical reasonings and circumstances, Artsakh is a very, very important region for Armenian spiritually. And the territories that are lost now from Armenian control, there are a lot of cultural and spiritual centers there. I think if new owner of power allowed and ensured secure access to those sites, that would be one of the first steps to take. So that people could go to the monasteries and pray and come back safely, that would be one of the first steps.
What's very important is that one thing that Armenia and Azerbaijan have in common is a very deeply held beliefs of the self-truth. And it's very important for the both countries to not only acknowledge the suffering of each other's side, but the violations that were committed, and being able to investigate and bring accountability for those violations. And that could be through internationally mediated truth and reconciliation process or by other means. But the jargon expression doesn't lose its importance. There's no